The Australian Financial Review.
Joe Aston, welcome to 7:30.
Good to be here.
How do you describe the relationship between Qantas and Anthony Albanese?
Cosy. Comorbid.
Joe Aston's new book on Qantas, The Chairman's Lounge, landed in Canberra this week with a thud.
Anthony Albanese's love affair with Qantas and its former CEO has shot him straight back into the spotlight.
The claims from former columnist Joe Aston's upcoming book state the Prime Minister received 22 free upgrades over more than a decade. He also reportedly claims the Prime Minister...
While the headlines are all about Anthony Albanese's flight upgrades, Aston's book also chronicles the turbulent reign of Alan Joyce. 13 months ago, Joyce crashed out of Qantas, egged on by angry customers and regulators and frustrated investors. When Joyce was appointed chief executive in 2008, Aston was working in the airline's communications department.
He was the unexpected choice. He was running the Jetstar business, which of course was much smaller then.
Joyce was 42, young by CEO standards, and he took on the top job just as the global financial crisis hit demand for travel.
In the 5 years before Alan Joyce became CEO of Qantas, the company made profits of $5 billion. And in Alan Joyce's first 5 years as CEO, he delivered just $360 million of profit over those first 5 years. And then in the sixth year, he posted a record $4 billion loss.
Eventually, he found his feet. And from 2015, Qantas started to make a lot of money.
Qantas in that period paid more than $3 billion to shareholders in dividends and buybacks. And as you can imagine, those shareholders were very happy and they'd had very hard years before that.
And then COVID-19 hit, and the problems began for one of Australia's most high-profile bosses. By this time, Aston had long left Qantas and was working at the Australian Financial Review as Rear Window columnist. He wrote a series of articles criticising Qantas for the way it wielded power in Canberra and revealed that not only was Anthony Albanese a member of Qantas's coveted Chairman's Lounge, so was his son, Nathan.
Again, I'm not going to comment on Chairman's Club membership. I've got privacy issues where we will not comment on who's in, who's been offered it and why they're there, so I will not.
Aston also wrote about the breakdown in customer service, resulting in late flights and lost bags. He wrote about Joyce's command and control leadership style and the airline's decision to illegally sack 1,700 people. And after he left the Financial Review, he put it all in a book.
It's a story about power being exercised in the shadows, and about a national icon pushing its customers and its employees to breaking point, trying to bank the nation's loyalty, but they ran out of credits.
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. Today, former Rear Window editor and author Joe Aston talks about what went wrong for the airline, its oversized influence in Canberra, and the extraordinary perks of a Qantas board seat. It's Thursday, October 31.
Today's episode of The Fin is brought to you by IG. IG is Australia's #1 CFD and FX provider, offering over 17,000 markets from domestic shares to international commodities, all on one platform. With competitive spreads and lightning-fast execution, trade the opportunities you hear with IG. To find out more, visit IG.com. CFDs are high-risk products. Refer to our PDS and TMD on our website. #1 in Australia by primary relationships, CFDs and FX. Investment Trends November 2023. Leverage Trading Report. IG Australia Proprietary Limited. AFSL 515106.
Joe, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast, and it's good to see you back in the building. How have you been?
Very good, thank you. Just emerging from my rabbit hole of the last 10 months.
Last time we did have you on the podcast, you were leaving the Financial Review, sadly, after 12 years of helming the Rear Window column, and you weren't really sure what you were going to do next. Why did you decide to write a book about Qantas?
I just felt that it was important that this story all be put in one place because there are just so many moving parts to what Qantas did, and it's very easy for them to brush it off when there's so much complexity, people can't get their head around it. And I wanted the story in one place where nobody could deny the immensity of what had occurred. But there was also, some strange signals from the ether, I think. I was right before Christmas. I'm one of Qantas's top flyers. I have been for 7 or something years, a Platinum 1 frequent flyer. And so at Christmas time, you get sent a present, and in the mail comes from Vanessa Hudson, a "Dear Joe, thanks for your loyalty" form letter, and in it a bottle of gin. I thought that was quite funny because I gave up drinking 5.5 years ago now, but the last drink I ever had was a gin and tonic on the QF12 from LA to Sydney. So I thought that was a sign. I thought, I think I've got to write the book.
And what are the big revelations in the book?
The revelations include...
We know the credit system was not as smooth as it should have been.
The intentional nature of moving $1.6 billion of ticket revenue into COVID credits and then making it maximally hard for customers to get it back.
These credits and vouchers will never expire.
The extent to which Qantas's influence machine was kicked into action to stop the Qatar Airways bid for extra flights.
Catherine King, why wasn't it in the national interest to give Qatar more flights into Australia?
Well, the first thing I would say is that Qatar can...
The extent to which Richard Goyder, the chairman, was unwilling to intervene as Qantas's reputation descended into crisis. And importantly, the extent of the extremely valuable freebies the then Transport Minister and then Shadow Transport Minister Anthony Albanese received from Qantas and its international partner Emirates for flight upgrades on his personal holidays.
With a new book on Qantas reporting that Anthony Albanese didn't just receive flight upgrades at the gate, but liaised directly with Qantas CEO Alan Joyce about upgrades for his personal travel.
And over time, these upgrades were worth cumulatively tens of thousands of dollars. Of course, Albanese's not the first politician ever to take a free upgrade from airlines, and he won't be the last. In his defence, he declared many upgrades. He says he's declared everything. But what's different is how much he did it and the fact that he was contacting the CEO of the company directly to ask for it.
But as you say, Joe, the Prime Minister has come out and defended these upgrades, saying they were all declared.
From time to time, members of Parliament receive upgrades. What's important is that they are declared. All of mine has been declared. Every single thing has been declared.
And he also defended his son's membership of the Chairman's Lounge, insisting Nathan was his plus one after his marriage broke up. What do you think of his responses?
I don't agree that his disclosures are complete. There are multiple occasions where he was accompanied by family members on those trips where he was upgraded. And other than on one occasion, he never disclosed those family members' upgrades. There's a lack of detail around it. He mostly doesn't say what class of travel he was upgraded to. And I also think, okay, it's within the rules if you declare it, but I don't know that that justifies the behaviour, for the Transport Minister of Australia, who has the personal power to decide which airlines fly into Australia and how often, for that person to be soliciting freebies from the CEO of the national airline for his personal holidays. I just don't think that you can justify that whether it's declared or not. And I think if Anthony Albanese had asked the CEO of Westpac or ANZ to put $50,000 in his bank account and then declared it on the Register of Interest, I don't think that anybody would say that that was okay. So I don't understand why it would be okay to call the CEO of an airline and say, please magically turn my economy ticket into a pointy end seat for me and my family. On the Chairman's Lounge membership, it's obviously good that the Prime Minister has finally deigned to confirm that Nathan is the member of the Chairman's Lounge, but his explanation is implausible for the reason that Jodie Hayden, his current partner, is his +1 to the Chairman's Lounge. Nathan is not. And again, the Prime Minister, soon after becoming Prime Minister, contacted Alan Joyce and asked him for a membership for his son. And that is not consistent with the story he's telling about somehow automatically his son became his +1 after his marriage ended.
So more broadly, do you think the prospect of flight upgrades for politicians and for staffers and access to the Chairman's Lounge give Qantas an unfair advantage in Canberra? Does it make them a more effective lobbyist across the political spectrum than other companies?
Yes, it does. Again, like banks can't put money in politicians' bank accounts. Telecommunications providers can't give complimentary internet and free iPhones to MPs. I mean, it's just, for some reason, people have a blind spot where when airlines do it, it's somehow okay. But look, the Chairman's Lounge is a brilliant thing for Qantas. I mean, they deserve points for ingenuity. It's a globally unique offering. It's a luxury space in every domestic terminal in the mainland capitals of Australia, plus Canberra. And you can go in there and have unlimited premium spirits and wine and have a meal from the a la carte restaurant. There's also benefits around when you travel. If you're booked in one class, very often you might get complimentary upgrade to the next class of travel. So there's a lot of free upgrades involved. And whether or not it affects the behaviour of public officials, I think is obvious when you look at how they travel themselves. Qantas hands out hundreds of Chairman's Lounge membership to Commonwealth officials. As a result, 90% of government travellers in financial 2024 flew on Qantas.
That's a huge number.
Well, especially because Qantas only has 32% market share. And so they fly 90% of the time with Qantas, even though the rules are, A, they must take the cheapest flight of the day, and B, lounge access must not be a consideration when booking the travel. So both of those rules are openly flouted. And what's the consequences? Nobody does anything about it. I have never and would not seek to claim causality between Anthony Albanese constantly getting gold-plated holidays from Qantas and Emirates in 2009 through to 2016, when in 2023 the Albanese government blocked Qatar from adding 35 more flights per week to Australia, which would have brought airfares down. I mean, that is impossible to prove. But it raises real questions. And importantly, let's not forget that in March and April of 2020, Qantas was instrumental in convincing the Morrison government not to provide a financial lifeline to Virgin Australia.
Virgin Australia has just gone into voluntary administration, reported George Roberts.
Ensuring that Qantas's major competitor fell over and into administration.
While all requests for financial support have so far been rejected, the government remains confident in the carrier's ability to push through the turmoil.
By the end of that year, Qantas's market share was the highest it's been since Ansett collapsed.
Joe, when you look at the last few years at Qantas, a lot of the criticism about the deterioration in customer service has been focused on Alan Joyce and his decisions. But you also write in the book about the board and their responsibility, particularly Chairman Richard Goyder. How did this all happen on Goyder's watch?
Richard Goyder took over as chairman from Lee Clifford in 2018. By that point, Alan Joyce had been CEO for a decade. And Joyce had got Qantas through, a series of crises. Qantas was now making record profits. Alan Joyce was an absolute rock star as the CEO who had fronted the gay marriage plebiscite the previous year. And so there was no question about who was really running the show at Qantas. And I've spoken to Qantas's largest shareholder, Pendle, about this, and they agreed that it was a real turning point when Lee Clifford retired and Richard Goyder took over. And effectively, Alan Joyce became executive chairman of Qantas and his board became first-class passengers. As Qantas was blowing up in 2022 and its customers were in uproar, Richard Goyder made the fateful decision of, rather than listening to customers and taking their feedback seriously, he listened to Alan Joyce and his management team and was convinced that actually this was all just COVID. It was an international aviation thing that was happening to all airlines. And he came out and he said, Alan Joyce is the best CEO in Australia by the length of a straight. Bearing in mind that by this point, Alan Joyce was the most hated CEO in Australia. So that did Richard Goyder immense damage, and it only got worse because as the crisis built, as the fury continued, Richard Goyder continued to back Joyce and failed to comprehend what was happening, and he even allowed Alan Joyce in June 2023 to sell $17 million worth of Qantas shares, which, again, that's when not only were customers and staff fed up with Alan Joyce, that's when shareholders got fed up with Alan Joyce too.
We've got some breaking news now. Qantas Group CEO Alan Joyce has advised the airline's board he will bring forward his retirement by 2 months.
After Alan Joyce had to resign in September 2023, in the absolute eye of a reputational firestorm, Richard Goyder then sought to save himself. And again, that was a terrible thing to watch because it was apparent to absolutely everyone except Richard Goyder that he was toast. And he just burned so much of his good reputation by trying to cling on when it was absolutely clear that shareholders wanted accountability, and certainly Qantas customers and staff were expecting accountability.
Qantas's chairman and new chief executive hauled before the Senate, presented with a manifest of complaints about the airline's recent performance.
Even the Qantas pilots, the people that we trust to keep us alive in the sky, came out and said that Richard Goyder has to resign, and even still Richard Goyder tried to cling on.
I'm not aware of any part of the Qantas workforce that actually wants you to stay.
The major shareholders on the board feel that I'm the best person to chair the board.
And that sort of 6-week period after Alan Joyce resigned, right up until Richard Goyder finally accepted that he had to resign, was sort of a bit of a tragic thing to watch.
The turbulence has proven too much. The Qantas chairman vacating his seat, Richard Goyder.
And it explained a lot of how Qantas got into the position it did, because it just showed everyone that nobody in the building, whether it be on the board or in management, was in tune with what the rest of the nation was seeing and feeling. All of the Qantas directors failed to challenge Alan Joyce. And what wasn't properly understood until my book is that Qantas directors are the highest paid in Australia, more than the big four banks, BHP, Rio Tinto, and that's via the immense value of their travel benefits. When you understand that a Qantas director can effectively get an extra $500,000 a year on first-class flights for them and their family, you understand why the incentive was for Qantas directors not to rock Alan Joyce's boat.
Today's episode of The Fin is brought to you by IG. IG is Australia's #1 CFD and FX provider, offering over 17,000 markets from domestic shares to international commodities, all on one platform. With competitive spreads and lightning-fast execution, trade the opportunities you hear with IG. To find out more, visit IG.com. CFDs are high-risk products. Refer to our PDS and TMD on our website. #1 in Australia by primary relationships, CFDs and FX. Investment Trends November 2023. Leverage Trading Report. IG Australia Proprietary Limited. AFSL 515106.
Joe, we're talking about your new book, The Chairman's Lounge, and about the turbulent reign of former Qantas CEO Alan Joyce and the considerable lobbying power of the airline. In your book, you detail the incredible financial value of a Qantas board seat. How does it work?
So everyone understands the elite social and professional status of being a Qantas board member. But what hasn't been understood is the financial value of board membership. Qantas directors who even moderately use the travel benefits that come with board membership are easily the highest paid directors in Australia. So every Qantas director, their partners, and all children under the age of 26 are entitled to 3 long-haul return trips and 9 domestic return trips every year in the highest class available on the aeroplane, all for free. The chairman gets 4 long-haul return trips for themselves and their family and 12 domestic return trips every year. So assuming your regular director has a partner and 2 kids under the age of 26, The price of a Sydney-London first-class ticket return is around $18,000 and a Sydney to Melbourne business class ticket is $1,500. So the market value of their travel entitlement, if you include the fringe benefits tax payable, of course, is around $500,000, and the chairman's is even higher. In addition to that, they then get these free flights. They don't get as many, but they continue to get free flights for themselves and their family after they leave the board for every year of service. So, as I've pointed out in the book, a director like Maxine Brenner, who spent 11 years on the board and only just left, Qantas shareholders will be paying for her and her family's travel until 2034. The Goyders will be getting free travel on Qantas shareholders until 2031. As I like to say, that this is a Qantas board that was monomaniacally focused on modernising the company's paying conditions and phasing out legacy agreements, except for themselves. Now, the new Qantas chairman, John Mullen, defended this at the AGM last week.
It doesn't necessarily actually cost the company anything other than the FBT, which is paid for by the company.
That's not a credible statement by John Mullen. These are confirmed seats. These are not space available seats, which are seats that you get if they're still empty after the flight closes. These are confirmed seats just like you can buy with money as a customer. And so that deprives the airline of revenue because those seats are taken off sale. And if not sales revenue for tickets, it deprives them of the ability to use those seats to burn points for points upgrades and therefore reduce the balance sheet points liability of the airline. I was pretty disappointed that was John Mullen's answer.
And Joe, while we're talking about the board, there were some very experienced directors during Joyce's time as CEO. Why did they fail to rein him in?
It's difficult to understand, especially if you look at some of the individuals involved. Michael L'Estrange, who was on the Rio Tinto board, of course, he put his name to the L'Estrange report, which quite shamefully minimised the Jukan Gorge debacle and attempted to allow the CEO and two senior executives to stay at the company. That was overruled by shareholders, and in fact, shareholders insisted that not only the CEO go, but L'Estrange and the chairman of Rio Tinto should resign for giving that even a try. You would have thought that L'Estrange could have seen the parallels between what happened at Qantas and what happened at Rio. Then you've got Belinda Hutchinson, who a long time ago was chairman of QBE, and she became chairman of QBE when a very dominant CEO, Frank O'Halloran, was running the company, and he ran the company into really serious financial trouble. I mean, QBE is only really just recovering now. And Hutchinson had to resign as QBE chairman. So Hutchinson had her own searing experience previously with trying to manage an all-powerful CEO. Todd Sampson, the marketing expert, who somehow, unlike the others, is still on the Qantas board, who was brought in as the guy, as the reputation guy, as the branding guy 10 years ago. And of course, Qantas's reputation collapsed. Their brand is in the bin, and exactly what contribution he made is very hard to discern. But he clung on. Even the largest shareholder of Qantas voted against his re-election last year. 34% of Qantas shareholders voted against his re-election, and even though the honourable thing would have been to resign, he just stuck in. In 2023, during this whole crisis, the board announced that Goyder would resign, and so would Maxine Brenner and another director, Jacqueline Hay. And then on top of that, they announced a governance review, which would look into what had happened, how it had happened, and also decide what to do about the enormous bonuses that Alan Joyce had been awarded. Those reports came back in August 2023, and they decided to cancel Alan Joyce's short-term and long-term bonuses for 2023, which cost him $9 million. But of course, for the immense damage that was done, Alan Joyce was still paid $15 million for 2023.
Joe, while management insisted at the annual meeting on Friday that the airline had turned a corner, the federal court last week delivered another significant blow. Tell us about the case that could leave Qantas with a compensation bill of more than $100 million, the biggest ever industrial relations loss in Australia.
So the thing about the Transport Workers Union case is that it really wasn't written about at the time. Nobody covered the trial. It was one of the most dramatic trials in industrial relations history, and I've devoted a whole chapter to it. I read all of the transcripts of that trial from beginning to end and was just absolutely flabbergasted. What Qantas understood from the get-go was that sacking 1,700 people would be legally challenged. And so they set about constructing reasons for doing so that they thought would stand up in court. And Justice Michael Lee suspected that that's what they had done, but wasn't able to prove it.
The Transport Workers Union has had a win over Qantas in its federal court fight over the airline's outsourcing of around 2,000 ground crew jobs.
Qantas appealed the case twice. The first appeal was unanimous of the full court of the federal court. So by that point, 4 judges to 0 had said that it was illegal. And then the High Court was unanimous. So in total, 11 judges to 0 have said that the outsourcing was illegal. And yet Qantas still ran around saying, we had sound commercial reasons for this decision, which they did, but that doesn't mean anything. There are sound commercial reasons for robbing a bank. That doesn't mean that you do it. So all up, Qantas is going to be paying something in the vicinity of $150 million in compensation. The penalty they could pay is $105 million. And of course, they've racked up, more than $20 million in legal fees as well. To say nothing of the just devastating reputational damage that has occurred. And a lifelong backroom operator, Ian Oldmeadow, who had been advising Qantas on industrial relations for 30 years, he was strongly against the outsourcing, and he was one of Alan Joyce's closest confidants. And he gave advice to Qantas that it was high risk, that the TWU would cause immense political damage to Qantas, and that they should not proceed, and if anything, they should at least water it down and outsource the jobs of far fewer employees. Clearly, Oldmeadow was not listened to, and Qantas preferred the advice of hardliners, whose advice, it turns out, was not consistent with the law. I think this is one of the most shameful things Qantas did in the Alan Joyce era, but frankly, it spilled into the Vanessa Hudson era because she had every opportunity to settle this case. I suspect the TWU would have settled for $150 million of compensation before Christmas last year, and this would have been off the plate of Qantas. It would have been out of the courtroom and it would have been finished. But instead, Qantas, as always, can't help being aggressive and gambled that they could get a compensation bill that was lower than this. And they gambled, and again, they failed.
Joe, a final question. Do you think Qantas has turned a corner, as Joyce's successor Vanessa Hudson said at the annual meeting on Friday? And what's the legacy of these crises? Have lessons been learned?
Well, Qantas is a very different company personnel-wise. There are very few executives left who worked for Alan Joyce at the very top level. The board has been turned over. Notwithstanding that one regrettable thing that John Mullen said at the Qantas AGM, I have a lot of confidence in his ability to lead the organisation, and I certainly don't think that there's any prospect of management pushing a board led by him around. Vanessa Hudson is not a natural change agent, having been at Qantas even longer than Alan Joyce. Having said that, I think she brings a far lower level of ego to the job and more natural empathy for customers and for staff, and that's welcome. But I think the jury's out on Vanessa Hudson. It's early days. She's got shareholders who want their pound of flesh, but she has a massive bill for aircraft and old planes that customers are fed up with. And how she juggles that is going to be very interesting to watch, and many of us will be watching very closely. She doesn't have the benefit of being believed automatically, like Alan Joyce used to be. So there's a high level of scepticism about anything that Qantas says or does, and I think there should be for now. But the reason there's so much outsized emotion in what Qantas has done is because there's so much love for Qantas. If you have something that people love so much, and then you monetize that love, then you can scarcely be surprised when the outrage is outsized as well, when you fail to carry the responsibilities that come with that. So what they need to do is, if they want to be the national carrier and derive all of the financial benefits that comes with, they need to understand that the responsibilities that come with the mantle have to be met, and they have to prove that they're going to do that again.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray, with Joe Aston reporting today. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow and Lap Fan. Fiona Buffini is the executive producer. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and consider rating and reviewing us as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.
Today's episode of The Fin was brought to you by IG. IG is Australia's #1 CFD and FX provider, offering over 17,000 markets from domestic shares to international commodities, all on one platform. Visit IG.com. CFDs are high-risk products. Refer to our PDS and TMD on our website. #1 in Australia by primary relationships, CFDs and FX. Investment trends November 2023. Leverage trading report. IG Australia Proprietary Limited. AFSL 515106.